Hello everybody, welcome to Module 5 of the init program in the Bit by Bit series. This is actually the first video in Module 5 of 3 videos, and in this video we're going to focus on the first major concept that we talked about in Booklet 3, and that is the concept of data types. So this is going to be the first time that we're actually going to write our own code on our machine instead of importing it. So that's why I've chosen to implement videos directly into the program so it's easier for you guys to follow along. So once again, our first step is still going to be to go to REPL.it. I'm already here, but if you're not, go ahead and navigate to the site. And once again, we should have an account, so we can go ahead and click login. Now use your credentials to log in. And once they're entered, go ahead and click the button. If you get this, go ahead and follow the directions. And once again, you'll be at this account page, and we don't really need to worry about anything else except for creating a new REPL. So go up here to the blue new REPL button. And the past few times we've clicked import from GitHub. This time we're going to create directly from REPL. So our language is going to be Python right here, which is the first one. So go ahead and select it. And then it gives you a default name, but let's go ahead and name it something that is better suited to our needs. So let's do init, because that's the name of the program. And we don't need to worry about the other settings. Once you have that in, go ahead and click Create REPL. Okay, so one of the things that we should talk about before we get started is when you create a default REPL on the website, it automatically creates a file called main.py, and it configures this run button without us having to do anything the way we had to for importing. And so I'm not going to mess around with that too much right now. The run makes it pretty easy, so whenever we click run, we can just run our file. Obviously right now we have nothing in there. And so we're just going to do most of our code in the main.py file, and we can use this green button just to make things move along faster. So if you remember in Booklet 3, we talked about a few of the different data types, and there are some ones that we did not cover, and that's okay because we will get to them once we need them. But for right now, let's go ahead and start out by creating a few variables. And so the way we do that is using a variable name, which can be whatever you want it to be. And so I'll just start with A, and then I can set that equal to whatever I want. So let's start with an integer, so like 3. And then I can do B equals, and I can do a float this time, so maybe 5.8. Then I can do C equals a string this time, so hello. Then we have the Boolean, so we can do D equals true. And then we can do E equals, and we can do a list, so we can do something maybe a little more personalized, so 2, because that's my favorite number. I can do my name, and then I can even put a list inside of a list, so I can do my hobbies as a list inside of this list that's all about me. So here you can see I've created a list which has my favorite number, my name, and then a list within the list that has my hobbies. Okay, so right now we've created variables, but if you try to run this code, you're going to see nothing happens, and that's because we haven't told the code to output anything or perform any calculations. We've only created variables. So the first thing we should do is just make sure that these are actually the type of variables that we want them to be. So we should remember that to output anything, we use a print function like this, and we can put whatever we want in the print to be able to output that. So let's just use the type feature, which we also talked about in the booklet, and let's just do this type of setup for each variable. And so we're going to find out the type for each of our different variables that we created and just confirm that they are in fact what we think that they should be. So this is really just the same code 5 times, and we're just changing what variable we have inside of the type. So feel free to stop the video whenever you need to if you are getting behind or you think I'm moving too fast, and enter the code in properly. But once you have this in, go ahead and click the run button. Now we're going to see 5 different outputs, 5 lines for each of our print statements. And we can match the types that are printed to the types that we expected them to be. So for A, we got class int or integer, which is what it is. It's a whole number. B, we got a float, which 5.8 is a float. It has a decimal part. Then we got str or string for hello. Then we got bool for boolean for true. And then we got list for E, which is a list of items. It just happens to have a list inside of it. So you might be wondering, well, what was the point of that? Well, yeah, right now it may seem like this is useless because we understand these fundamental types and we can more or less predict what they're going to say. But when you get further along into coding and you're dealing with other data types that maybe are specialized, it can be very confusing sometimes, and using type can help clear up any sort of concerns you may have or help in the debugging process. So now that we have viewed some of these types, the next thing that we're going to do is talk about type conversion. And this is also a very important concept that we did not talk a lot about in the booklet, and that's why I think that this is a good time to really get into some details. So type conversion, as the name suggests, is converting from one data type to another. And some are more straightforward than others. So the first conversion we're going to talk about is converting from a float to an integer. So here we have a float b, and let's say that we want just the integer part, the whole part of b, which in this case would be 5, because 5.8 has a whole part of 5 and a decimal part of 0.8. So keep in mind that this is not rounding. Rounding is a different function that we'll talk about later. This is simply called truncating. We're only getting the integer part of the number. So if we were to do print int b and run this code, we would get 5. And so what you can do with types is you can use them and you can enter something into them, and Python will try to convert automatically for you. And so b is 5.8, it's a float. We wrapped it with int, and Python immediately decided that we need to convert 5.8 to an int, and it got 5. Obviously it cannot keep the 0.8 because that would not be an integer. Now we can even see that if we create another variable f, which is equal to 5.0, and then we go ahead and print the type of f. Now 5.0 to us is technically a whole number, but since it has that decimal point, Python is going to interpret it as a float. And once we do print int f, we can see this. We get class float, and then when we print the integer, we get 5. So we can see that Python has changed the number from 5.0 to 5. So the next thing that we can talk about when it comes to type conversion is converting a string to a number. And so this is also something that's pretty cool about Python. So we can go ahead and change this f variable, and let's make it a string, but inside the string let's do a number like 2.5. Now if we print type f like this, you can go ahead and click run, and you'll see str or string, and that's because we have the quotes around it. But if you try to convert this to a float, because in reality inside of it is a float, you'll see that we can easily get this to 2.5, and it no longer is a string. And the way we can even confirm this is we can do print type of the float of f. And so you can see that you can sort of batch these commands together. You can use a parentheses to put one inside of the other, and it will still work. And so now that I have this, I go ahead and click this. We have class string, and then we have class float. And so we can directly convert a number in string form to a number that is in actual float form. And the same sort of situation would happen for an integer. And so this can be very useful if you're taking user input in the form of a string, or a part of a string has a number that you're interested in. And it's a useful type conversion that sometimes we tend to overlook, but it is there. Now, the other thing that we can do is we talked about truthiness values. And so those relate to whether a non-Boolean value is evaluates to true or false. Obviously with D, it is true, and so a Boolean can be true or false, and it's pretty obvious what the Boolean or the truthiness value of that variable is. But what's the truthiness value of A? What's the truthiness value of E? So to do that, we can go ahead and print bool of, let's start with A. And if we click run, we see true. And so this is something we talked about in the book. So any non-zero integer or float is going to have a truthiness value of true. If we change our f to 0, and then we print boolean of f like this and click run, we get false. So a 0 value in terms of a number is going to be false. And we can see a similar thing occur with strings and lists. So right now C is hello. If we go ahead and print the boolean value of C, we get true because it's a non-empty string. But if I create another variable G and set it equal to just an empty string, so just quote, quote, and then I go ahead and print the boolean value of G, I get false. And so you can sort of start to extrapolate the fact that empty values, empty strings, empty lists, which I'm not demonstrating but works in the same way, are going to have truthiness values of false. And in terms of numbers, non-zero values will always have truthiness of true, and 0 will have a truthiness of false. Now, this is something that is not as widely used. It's not something that you necessarily need to know for your coding practices at the moment, but it is a useful tool to have, and sometimes it is actually utilized in code. And so this was just a basic demonstration of how we can look at data types. We can look at the type of a variable, and then we can also convert from one data type to another. In the next video, we'll talk about operators and how we can actually manipulate the various data types to get conditions.